Welcome back to this week's episode of Wickens Wicked Reptiles. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what is the best beginner lizard. Is it a leopard gecko or is it a jeweled lacerta? Stick around. Age-old question, what is the best pet lizard? And really I should prefix this. There is no such thing as a perfect beginner lizard or best pet lizard. It's what's best for you. So I'm going to outline the facts on each of these two lizards, and I'll give you my opinion of if you're a beginner, what's the best for you. And of course, if you're an intermediate watching this video, you're going to find some great useful tips in choosing to get your next lizard as well. Leopard geckos, like Littlefoot here, are crepuscular, small-bodied lizards from the Middle East. These guys are terrestrial lizards. They spend their time on the ground. Jeweled lacertas are diurnal lizards, also terrestrial lizards, insectivores, and they come from Western Europe. One of, if not the most important thing that people think about right off the top of their heads when they consider getting a lizard is how big does this thing get? And I think that's really important, and these two lizards are very different. They're vastly different. Leopard geckos, on one hand, are smaller. These guys between 7 and 10 inches in adulthood. There is a little bit of sexual dimorphism in that females get a little bit smaller than males do, or males get larger than females, I should say. Where jeweled lacertas, on the other hand, are much larger. These guys get to 24 inches, 15 to 24 inches, sexual dimorphic as well, in that females are smaller than the males. And the big difference between these two that you can tell right up front is a male has a much larger head than a female, whereas with leopard geckos, you gotta look at the pores on the underside of their bellies to figure out if it's a male or a female. So I can't really pick a winner in terms of size. Do you want a larger lizard or do you want a smaller lizard? I'm going to give this one a tie, which means that we're going to go 1-all right off the bat. Now the biggest thing when determining how big of an enclosure you need, which is something that's really important also, how much room is this animal going to take up in my house, is something that you're going to think about. And if you're a kid trying to get a reptile, your parents are definitely going to think about that. And this is a big difference too. Leopard geckos, like Littlefoot, they need a smaller enclosure because if you look at the size of her, she's only about 7 inches. This is one of the smaller leopard geckos that I have. I hatched her out myself, and she only needs a 28-quart tub or 20-gallon enclosure. And I wanted to say the tub thing first because when I say gallons, I don't mean that a over-the-top opening type of fish tank is the best way to keep either of these animals. It's suitable for both, but I think front opening enclosures or tub systems or whatever are just as good, if not maybe even better. So for a leopard gecko, 20-gallon for one. They are cohabitable. We'll talk about that at the end. So if you wanted two, you'd want 30, right? An extra 10 gallons for each one, or an extra 15 gallons for each one, keeping females together. We'll get into that later. Jeweled lacertas, in most cases, are going to need a much larger enclosure. Well, in all cases. For a small lizard like a female jeweled lacerta or a juvenile male, for example, you can get away with a 40. I would, you know what, 55, because what I would say is the smallest enclosure that would be acceptable for a female or a juvenile male, juvenile female as well. A male, on the other hand, I would definitely suggest at least 60-gallon enclosure, 55 at the very bare minimum. And the reason for that is they get larger. They get larger than females. What I have mine in is a custom-made enclosure. It is 4 feet long, 18 inches deep, and 18 inches high. In hindsight, I wish I would have made it 2 feet deep instead of 18 inches. I think that would have been a better idea. But Bob here is going to be going outside into his summer enclosure, which you can watch a video about right here. So I'm hoping that that happens relatively soon. It's the middle of June. Last year was 35 degrees on this day, or in Fahrenheit, almost 100 degrees. And today it is 69 degrees outside. What is going on? And tub systems, or any sort of system that doesn't allow for a UVB light, is not acceptable whatsoever for a jeweled lacerta. So your options are less and you need more space. And for that reason, we're going to go with the leopard gecko, which means that they are winning 2-1. Being that this is a cold-blooded animal and so is this, that means that we need certain things that would be different than a fish or a cat or a dog or a bird, such as high heat and in some cases high humidity. One of them does and one of them doesn't. Let's start with leopard geckos. So leopard geckos, they come from an arid place. They come from the Middle East, right? So you're going to find them in parts of deserts where it's grassy, rockland type things. I'm making these words up, but here's a picture of what kind of it's going to look like in their environment. For them, the heat on the cool side, because you're going to want a cool side and a warm side, you're going to want a thermal gradient for both of these species. Leopard geckos, you want in the mid to high 70s on the cool side. On the hot side, you want mid to high 80s. And then you want your basking spot to be 90, 92 degrees, something like that. It's pretty darn simple. In most people's homes, all you need for this is an under-tank heater. Heating is the best with an under-tank heater for this lizard because they get their heat from the ground. They're only out during dawn and dusk and sometimes in the middle of the night, so they're not going to be basking at all. So it's pretty easy. Jeweled Lacertas, on the other hand, like Bob, who is a grouchy guy, I might add, they're going to need a little bit warmer. So their cool side is going to be closer to the high 70s, even some people will say 80. And then on the hot side, you're going to want them in the high 80s. Some people will even say 90, and then high 90s for the basking spot. And you do need a basking spot, by the way. Humidity is a little bit different as well. Much more easily achieved with a leopard gecko because leopard geckos come from a drier place. You want a drier humidity level in your home. And for that, all you need is nothing. You don't need anything. I mean, I would suggest having a humid hide if you want to know more about leopard gecko care. I've got a complete guide right up here. So your sweet spot for a leopard gecko is 20 to 40%. Most people's homes never get above 50, and even if you're approaching 50, you're okay with these guys. Give them a humid hide, of course, so they have a place to shed when it's time to shed. Most animals want it more humid when it's time to shed. It allows their skin to loosen a little bit better. But with Jeweled Lacertas, they come from Western Europe. They come from places like Spain, where in the summer, although it's dry, there is a wetter season as well. And these guys, you're going to want between 50 and 60%. It's really hard to find information on these guys because they're not quite as available. They have been in captivity at this scale for such a long time. Some people will even say up to 70%. So I keep my guy around 55, 60%. You want a moist substrate. These guys, you want it drier. So it's a lot harder to keep the parameters that are suitable for a Jeweled Lacerta, in my opinion anyway. So I'm going to go out and say that we're going to give this one a leopard gecko again. Now we're at 3 to 1. And heat and humidity kind of goes hand in hand with lighting. And with leopard geckos, we'll start there. Again, really easy. You don't need light at all. You don't need a basking spot because they want their heat from the ground. You can put a basking spot on if you want. They don't need UVB at all. Some people will say a low percentage is good for them. I tend to agree, but it's not necessary. You can keep them in tub systems. And then Jeweled Lacertas, on the other hand, they need a basking spot because they're diurnal, which means they're out during the day. And they do need a UVB light as well. 5.0 is what I suggest, not a desert bulb. You need something a little bit lower than that. But you do need a UVB light. Otherwise, they won't be able to process calcium. They'll get metabolic bone disease like Bob does here. I got him like this. I'm the third owner of him. So clearly someone wasn't watching videos like this or doing their research. So in this case, no light required whatsoever, and Bob needs at least 2 lights in a UVB strip and a basking bulb. So again, much easier for a leopard gecko. And what are we at now? 3 to 1. And with any animal, you gotta feed these things, right? So what's easier and what's more interesting? What's best for a beginner? Here is where it's gonna be a little bit controversial, or not really controversial, but a matter of your opinion. Leopard geckos are insectivores. That's all they eat. You could feed them baby mice if you really wanted to, but they're insectivores. That's what they eat in the wild. Things like crickets, silkworms, mealworms, superworms, all that sort of stuff, which is really easy to find and pretty darn cheap to find at your local pet store and reptile stores, expos, all that sort of thing. Jeweled Lacertas, on the other hand, they have a more varied diet. These guys are insectivores, some would say, but I would say omnivores, judging by my research. And what I mean by that is they'll eat things in the wild like grasses and flowers and things like that. And their favorite thing to eat in the wild is snails, which is why their jaws are so powerful in comparison to a leopard gecko anyway. But these guys can get away with just eating insects. Bob here has eaten mice before. Sometimes he'll just kind of stop eating a certain type of insect. He's a little bit pickier with the type of insects that he eats during the year, certain parts of the year. In other parts of the year, you walk up to the cage and he tries to eat you through the glass. So it really does depend. I think that in the wild, these guys will go down for a small brumation, or a short brumation, I should say, where leopard geckos don't really do that. And as you can see, leopard geckos are really cute when they eat. They're really adorable to watch in general, but when they eat, it's funny because they kind of hunt their insects, which is hilarious. An 8-foot animal that if you blew it up would look like a dinosaur, and then looking at it in perspective, trying to eat these little crickets and mealworms and stuff, adorable. Bob kind of looks like he's out to hurt somebody when he's ready to eat. He's not gentle at all, And I've only got experience with 2 Jeweled Lacertas. Bob I still have. And of course it's more fun to feed Bob because he can eat things like plants. Well, Jeweled Lacertas can. Bob won't eat plants for whatever reason, but I had a Jeweled Lacerta before that would. So it's a little bit more of a varied diet, and because of that it's more fun. And I think they're more ferocious eaters. I don't know if that's the right word, but Bob certainly is. So for this reason, I'm going to go ahead and give this one to the Jeweled Lacerta. So now we're at 4-2. Behavior and handling is something that is very important, especially if you're going to get a reptile. It's your first one. It'll be your only one. You're going to want to handle the thing. What's the point of having it? Unless, of course, what you want is like a green tree python that just looks beautiful. If you want something you can handle, there's a clear winner here. Leopard geckos, I say time and time again, are one of the easiest handling animals ever. As long as you don't rip their tail off, which you'd have to be pretty darn aggressive to do, they're good. They're the best. They're awesome. They don't bite you. Their nails feel kind of funny, but they don't scratch you even if they wanted to. They're not venomous. They don't really bite. They're great. Bob here bites everything. Now, Jeweled Lacertas in general, I should mention, they don't really bite a lot. I mean, males during breeding season could get aggressive. They're a little bit bigger than females, and they do breed pretty aggressively, like a bearded dragon, for example. But these guys are pretty placid animals, too. And the last one that I had, the female Lacerta that I had, she was handleable. Bob is not. So it's individual to individual, but being that 50% of the Lacertas that I've owned were not handleable, it's a pretty clear-cut winner here. Not only that, but they eat snails in the wild, so if they do get a hold of you, it's maybe won't break skin, but it's a pretty shocking bite. It's pretty strong. So I would say that for sure, the easier one to handle is the Leopard Gecko. And in terms of behavior, I think this is kind of where we give a little bit of a half a point to a Jeweled Lacerta because it's out during the day, and they are kind of like mini tegus in that they're very smart, they're very clever. You can see that they're really aware of what's going on, where the Leopard Gecko is kind of dopey. It's a little bit derpy, I think, but Bob definitely isn't. He's very aware. I'm going to say that this one is a tie. So that means that the score is 4-3. And everything in this video up to this point means nothing if you can't find these animals. So cost and availability is a really important thing. And the good news is neither one are super expensive. Leopard geckos you can buy for 30 bucks all day long. It's really hard to find ones that aren't a specific morph, like certain different types of morphs. So, yeah, there's more variety as well. They're on every stand in a reptile expo. They're at every pet store, every reptile shop. And Jeweled Lacertas, they're not. I mean, a Jeweled Lacerta, 150 bucks in my area is about average. You can find them in the States I've seen for 70 bucks or so, but they're a little bit more expensive than a Leopard Gecko can be. Don't get me wrong, Leopard Geckos get expensive when you get into super designer morphs with several different types of recessive genes and things like that. And availability, it's kind of hard to find a Jeweled Lacerta. I've never seen one at a pet store. The reptile shop in my area does have one, but they're really harder to find than other animals. And of course, there's wild-caught specimens where with leopard geckos, there's really not. So you're almost guaranteed to get a captive bred animal with a leopard gecko, where Bob here is captive bred. There's a lot of wild-caught specimens, not just Jeweled Lacertas, but desert Lacertas and other types of ocellated lizards. I think that's what their other name is. So I think that in terms of availability and cost, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's cheaper and easier to find a leopard gecko than it is to find a Jeweled Lacerta, which means that we're at 5-3. And let's get into morphs. I don't want to put a lot of emphasis on this because if it's a beginner animal, it's your first animal, it's not really going to be super important how amazing and crazy the genetics are behind the animal. You just want a companion to look at and feed and just, you want an animal. That's what you want, right? But if morphs are important to you, clear-cut winner. Again, Jeweled Lacertas, I've only really seen melanistic animals, amelanistic animals as well. So they're not really a lot going on with these guys. I've never seen an albino. Maybe they exist. I looked on the internet before I did this video and I couldn't find anything super crazy about it. So I think for sure if you're into morphs, leopard geckos, they're really easy to find. A lot of them aren't super expensive either. It's really easy here. The leopard gecko wins this one by a landslide. In terms of morphs, it's definitely the leopard gecko, which means that we're at 6-3. Let's round it off. I think we know who wins this Best Beginner Lizard Challenge, but just for the sake of it, here's something that both of them do well. A lot of people, when they want a lizard, they want several of them in the same enclosure because they're more fun to watch. And for all of you who say, cohabiting is bad, it's only for our interest, it's only for us, well, guess what? Animals in captivity, generally, for what we do in a hobby, is only for us anyway. So I think your point is moot. Leopard geckos, as long as you put females together only, and you only put males and females for short periods of time for breeding purposes, and never putting males together, you're good to go. Littlefoot and her tank mate Sarah, they've lived together for their entire lives, no problem. I've had several other leopard geckos. I've never heard, personally, an anecdote of two female leopard geckos hurting each other unless they were of vastly different sizes, or if it's bullying because of food, or there's not enough hides. As long as you're doing whatever you're doing right, I've never heard of it going bad. Jeweled Lacertas, on the other hand, these guys, it's a little bit harder to find the information because they're not as common. I think females together, from what I understand, and from people I've talked to who actually breed these animals, they say that they're actually fine like this. As long as you don't put two males together, same sort of idea, and males and females only short periods of time for breeding purposes, as long as you put females together, you should be A-okay. So I'm going to give this a tie, which means the end of the score is going to be 7-4. So there you go. Leopard geckos are a best beginner reptile in this head-to-head challenge anyway. And of course, I want to mention again, this is my opinion, just looking at each of these categories and thinking for a beginner what I think would be the best. But really, I want to say, a beginner reptile is what's up to you. As long as you do the research, any reptile can be a best beginner reptile. So I want to say thanks for coming back. We're going to hit 600 subscribers before Thursday, I think, which means this is the last time to get in your name for the draw. If you want this WWR shirt, I've got one with your name on it. All you got to do is enter in the video up in the left-hand corner here, right-hand corner, however this works out when I edit the video. That bird is so loud. Just go ahead and put your name in there. I'm going to do the draw likely on Thursday. I think we'll be at about 600 subs then. And then I want to say thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button. Hit like if you enjoyed the video. And because I do videos every Monday and Thursday, that means that I'll see you on Thursday.